For better or worse, I've become associated with a certain cream Moto Guzzi Eldorado. I thought I'd give a thumbnail sketch of how that came to be. It's a familiar story. After many dry years without riding, in 2008 I was suddenly bitten by the motorcycle bug and went searching for a bike. The first motorbike I saw that appealed to me was a 1972 Moto Guzzi Eldorado. I hadn't been keeping up with motorcycling literature. I had no idea about the newer machines available and all the massive changes in technology and performance which had occurred since the late 70s when I last paid attention. I saw a bike I fancied and pounced on it. I certainly didn't think of it as an old bike or a classic. It conformed perfectly to my image of what a motorcycle should look and sound like. It wasn't one of those plasticky pseudo-race bikes I saw from time to time that whined and yowled, or one of those bloated, stretched-out cruisers that were all noise and chrome. Jacked-up crash bars and luggage ADV bikes were only just beginning to become popular and weren't on my landscape. I had a vague awareness of ABS, but such high-tech innovations as traction control and multiple riding modes lay somewhere in the future and were not for me. I'm not sure how I imagined my second phase of motorcycling life would take shape. I suppose I thought of local rides and perhaps the occasional venture further afield. But I don't think lengthy tours were on my mental horizon. And I had no idea that it would lead me to a spectacularly successful second career as a motorcycle travel writer. I'm joking, of course. My little travel books cater to that tiny portion of the motorcycling readership who enjoy old motorbikes, deserted gravel roads, and the ramblings of an opinionated, balding old ex-Brit. Many thanks for the support, by the way, all three of you. Before I bought it, the Eldorado had been sitting idle for many years. Although he was no longer riding it, its owner had looked after it well, making sure it didn't deteriorate too much. The carbs needed a good cleaning, and the brakes had to be properly bedded in. But otherwise, it was good to go. My early rides were close to home and of short duration. Then one day, I got it into my head that I'd had enough of Ontario's trees. I needed to be above the tree line, up where the air is clear. And since I didn't have a kite, I'd have to ride to the nearest place where the weather is so brutally Arctic that no trees can grow. That place is the top of the Chic-Choc range of mountains on the Gaspé Peninsula of Quebec, about 1,100 kilometers from my house. This was our first major trip. I was only just beginning to learn the Guzzi's secrets, so when, after happily humming along a major highway leading to Quebec City, she suddenly spluttered to a halt, at first I was at a loss to know what to do. The steady flow of gasoline down the hot engine cases was my first clue. It suggested that something was blocked in the carburetor. A quick and easy roadside fix. After only a few minutes of head scratching and tool twiddling, I was able to resume my journey and my rendezvous with the bare and windy summit of Mount Jacques-Cartier. The return journey was a little more stressful. The previous owner had attached an external oil filter system by plumbing into the oil channels in the sump. I say plumbing because all the external connections had been manufactured from standard household copper water pipe, held together with soldered joints. Inevitably, vibrations from the engine had caused one of the joints to come loose, allowing a fine mist of oil to soak my right boot. It wasn't a showstopper. I still managed to ride home, but those copper pipes were soon in the recycle bin, replaced with some high-pressure hoses from the local hydraulic supply store. That first jaunt taught me a number of important things. The Eldorado was a delight to ride long distances. It rolled along smoothly, conveying a sense of mechanical relaxation and durability. At steady highway speeds, it felt as though it could effortlessly circumnavigate the globe. Such mechanical ease communicates itself to the rider, so long, high-mileage days soon became our regular pattern. The following year I ventured a little further afield. Some places exert a strangely beguiling influence on a person, or at least they do to me. Anytime I looked at a map of Canada, I found my eyes drawn to a little spot near the heart of that vastness of empty terrain that includes northern Quebec and Labrador. Labrador City. What kind of a city could there be in the middle of that huge territory of hills, rivers and forests? The map showed a single road leading there from the south, and a single road heading east towards the coast. With a population of just over 7,000, it seemed a city I might be able to tolerate. That the road north from the St. Lawrence River coast also passed close to the enormous circular crater lake Loch Manicouagan, clearly visible from space, was an added attraction. At that time, in 2009, Quebec's beautifully curvaceous Highway 389 was only paved as far as the colossal Manic 5 Dam at the outlet of Loch Manicouagan. The remaining 350 kilometers north to Labrador City were almost all unpaved. Although I'd already ridden a few short sections of gravel road on the Eldorado, it did cross my mind that this would be something of a test, both for the bike and the rider. Would I be able to ride the distance without falling off? What if I ruined a wheel in a pothole or a rock? What if I damaged myself? We cripple ourselves with what-ifs. There was only one way to find out. In the end, the journey up to Labrador City was a stroll in the park. The Eldorado coped with the bumpy, loose surface with ease, and I quickly learned that if I relaxed my grip on the handlebars and let the front wheel wander around wherever it chose, I could ride in relative safety. Mishaps along the way? By the time I got to Labrador City, one of the large bolts holding the lower triple clamp to the forks had vibrated loose and disappeared. A quick stop at a car parts store soon turned up a replacement. They didn't have a suitable metric bolt, but the one they found for me more or less fit, and is still doing its job after many thousands of kilometers. 4 days and almost 4,000 kilometers later, I was back home and eager for more. Other, much longer rides followed, and each time I was either on my Guzzi Eldorado or some other old relic of a similar vintage. My search for empty gravel roads started taking me further afield. In 2012, I was back in Labrador City, heading east along the Trans-Labrador Highway towards Happy Valley Goose Bay, and ultimately to the Labrador coast. The highway had only been punched through to Port Hope Simpson 3 years earlier, and apart from some short sections of paved road near the small towns of Churchill Falls and Happy Valley Goose Bay, it was unpaved virtually the whole way. It felt adventurous. The road was a thin ribbon of gravel through a vast wilderness of bogs, swamps and stunted spruce. Everywhere one looked there were lakes and ponds. With no commercial value, the forests are untouched. Walk just a few steps off the highway and you may never find it again. Then as you approach the coast, it starts to feel really wild. By the time you've covered most of the 400 kilometers from Happy Valley Goose Bay to Port Hope Simpson, the black spruce and balsam fir trees are a thing of the past, and you've entered a new, open, wind-blasted landscape of low, rolling hills and dwarf, scrub barrens leading down to the shoreline. This is a wild coast. A few small communities cling to the shore. Despite the brutal Arctic winds blowing off the Strait of Belle Isle, which stunt the vegetation and keep the temperatures low all year round, people have been living along the Labrador coast for thousands of years. During a later trip, while stuck at Blanc-Sablon for a couple of days awaiting the ferry across to Newfoundland, which was unable to run because of the waves, my wife and I visited the archaeological site at L'Anse Samoa. We learned that people had started to occupy the area about 9,000 years ago to hunt and process seals, and 3,000 years later chose to bury the red ochre-covered body of a young person face down beneath a stone mound. This site was occupied on and off for about 7,000 years, and there are many other places, both ancient and more modern, which have felt the impact of human settlement. As early as the 16th century, Basques from the northern Iberian Peninsula were attracted to the riches of these waters, establishing fishing and whaling villages in many of the coast's best harbours. Right and bowhead whales were common in the cool coastal waters. Within a few years, hundreds of people were engaged in hunting, butchering and rendering the giant beasts to provide lamp oil to light the homes of Europe. Fortunately, those days are over. The whales still swim in the straits, giving tourists like myself the occasional glimpse of themselves from the ferry deck as they surface. These days, most of the shoreline communities survive by commercial fishing and tourism. I suspect it's a hard-scrabble life, although the people we encountered during our 2-day wait for the ferry seemed remarkably inured to the conditions and calm with the inevitable delays they cause. But I digress. The point of this rambling is that once I started exploring further afield on the Guzzi, I got bitten, hard, by the motorcycle travel bug. It got under my skin. When I wasn't on the road or couldn't be riding because of the weather, I was dreaming about riding, scrutinizing maps, watching other people's videos of places they'd been, and planning new adventures. Life with the Cream Eldorado hasn't always been easy. During the almost 160,000 kilometers I've ridden it, we've had our share of mechanical issues requiring some tender loving care, which sometimes resulted in scraped bloody knuckles and swearing. A broken gearbox, various clutch problems, a damaged piston, the occasional electrical gremlin. But these are the kinds of things you have to expect if you use an older bike in a serious way. Fortunately, the older generations of Guzzi V-twins are absurdly simple to work on, so even a mechanical stumble-bum like me can usually troubleshoot and fix all but the most serious issues.